You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Hi, I'm Bella Perez Rubio, Puma Podcast for Teka Teka News. It's September 7. The United Nations has declared it the International Day of Clean Air for Blue Skies. Their goal is to make us understand how important it is to improve air quality to protect human health. We blame urban development, rapid industrialization, and human activity for air pollution and environmental harm. But there are ways for urban development to coexist with environmental conservation while promoting our well-being. In A State of Mind, a show we at Puma Podcast created for Ayala Land, we talked about precisely this. How can we reimagine our cities and make them livable?
Isn't it so nice to see artwork in the city? Like the trees. It's a steel sculpture by Renato Paz Contreras, which stands in the middle of Burgos Circle in Bonifacio Global City, Taguig. The tree trunks rise from a patch of grass, their branches intertwining into a shared canopy of leaves. You've probably seen it on a night out with friends. But what lies underneath, hidden from sight?
That place in BGC is the lowest place in BGC. So that during Ondoy, the entire BGC was not flooded, but only that part of Burgos Circle. And it was only about a little higher than your ankle. Underneath that art piece is a detention tank. That's the size of 8 Olympic-sized swimming pools. 8. The detention tank temporarily detains the water so that if there's a rush of water, it doesn't all go to the nearby communities.
Manny Blas, the man you heard earlier in this podcast, has worn many hats. He's the head of sustainability for Ayala Land. In the course of his career, he was in charge of the operations of Bonifacio Global City and was responsible for minding the safety and concerns of commuters catching their daily rides along Ayala Avenue. Manny knows, in other words, that nothing impacts land like humans trying to change and manage it, whether it's in the name of surviving, living, or even developing.
And when you develop a piece of land and you have concrete, the land doesn't anymore absorb the water, right? It just glides through the concrete and it goes to your communities nearby and they get flooded. But you don't want to do that, right? So there's a detention tank that temporarily detains all of this volume of water and then it spews it out at a certain rate so that the nearby communities don't get the flood, don't get the water at a much faster rate than they can absorb.
The glaring and everyday challenge to sustainability officers in land development, therefore, is obvious. How and where is balance to be achieved? Or is it even close to possible?
The broadest definition of sustainability is using the resources of our planet in a manner that we do not compromise the ability of the next generation to use these same resources. So in other words, there's things that are going to be left so that every generation henceforth are going to be able to live nicely here on Earth. And there are 3 things that we're doing in order to eventually get there.
So, 1, site resiliency. That's exemplified precisely by understanding built-in features to the land, such as in making use of the lowest point in BGC to enhance a natural sink. 2, pedestrian mobility, which Manny says includes mass transportation. And the third item to approach sustainability, he says, is resource efficiency.
In other words, how do we use basic resource, whether that's water, fuel, electricity? So site resiliency means our choice of sites have to be such so that they will withstand weather changes that are going to be more severe. Not only in our choice of sites, but in the way we develop our sites. Because it's easy to develop. It doesn't take much. But how do you develop sustainably is much more difficult.
Literally, what sustainability or sustain means to maintain. You sustain things means you keep it, you maintain it. But actually, for sustainability planning, that's the opposite of what you want. You want to change the way you're doing things now so that you'll be able to maintain a certain lifestyle into the extended future. But in order to do that, you have to change a lot of things that you're doing now.
Art Corpuz is an urban regional planner, awarded by the PRC as Most Outstanding Environmental Planner, a fellow of the Philippine Institute of Environmental Planning, Foundation for Economic Freedom, and also a board member of Ayala Land. A lot of, and central to any desirable lifestyle, Corpus says, goes to the second principle that Manny Blas outlined, mobility. And it's a component that necessitates thinking beyond the development area itself. Mobility, the very notion of allowing people to move between places, compels and requires developers to think of entire societies, not just their investment locations.
The cities are just components of a region. Region is composed of urban areas and non-urban areas. So hindi mo dapat sila ipaghiwalay. Nag-iiba lang yung scale. So for example, you're concerned about pedestrian mobility in a neighborhood. That's connectivity. But you're also concerned with interregional mass transportation. That's also connectivity pero at a regional scale. So that's basically urban and regional planning. Yung sustainability.
The second thing that you will see in all of our estates is what we call pedestrian mobility. Because if you can plan an estate so that everything is nearby, and a rule of thumb is 15 minutes walk. If instead of, you're inside a village and you wanted to buy medicine and you have to take your car, drive out to the nearest drugstore in order to buy your medicine, if you can just go down an elevator and walk 5 minutes to a drugstore, you've saved the carbon that you would have discharged if you got your car. So pedestrian mobility is something that we feel very strongly about. Pedestrianization includes bike mobility and personal mobility devices. And we took the opportunity to do that during the pandemic. You will see in Ayala Avenue now, the outer lane is dedicated for bikes. In BGC, you'll see the same thing. And right now, we're just doing it temporarily by putting in those bollards. But in our newer estates, you will see it built in as part of the road infrastructure. If you ask me, what was the most significant contribution I've done in Makati when I was managing it? What I can tell you is organizing commuters queuing in Ayala Avenue so that if you are going to Baclaran, it's in this line. You have bollards that organize people. Before, when it was every man, woman, and child for himself and herself rushing to the arriving bus, now which is organized.
And of course, within the development itself, mobility is central to a thriving city, or even just a village or neighborhood. The living environment itself must in fact encourage people to move.
If a city does not encourage or has very little open space or doesn't have any room for nature, it's a city that's setting itself up for failure. If a city does not enable its people to move around freely, then that's a non-sustainable city at this point. But if it has the means to turn itself around at some point so that it can restore nature, people can start living there again because they can get around, then that's a sustainable city.
The final point is resource efficiency. Mr. Blas says that as of 2021, all of Ayala Land's commercial buildings, including their offices, malls, hotels, and resorts, are certified carbon neutral. They are either running on renewable energy, solar power or hydropower, or for everything else, their carbon footprint is offset by forests established and sustained by the company. Ayala Land has 6 permanent forests in the Philippines, the closest to Manila being a 100-hectare plot in Alaminos, Laguna. There are others in Nuvali, Laguna, in Palawan, in Cebu, in Iloilo, and in Davao. They've planted over 100,000 trees in the last 5 years, and are protecting the growth that's already there.
The long-term goal is 2050 net zero. That means you're not discharging any more carbon to the atmosphere. There's an interim goal of 2030, a certain percent reduction of that, so that it gives you a fighting chance for 2050. And then between now and 2030, what we're doing in our operations, the site resiliency, pedestrian mobility, resource efficiency, in order to slowly get there.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. If you're interested in the ideas we just talked about, listen to A State of Mind on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, o kung saan man kayo pumapodcast. This episode was put together by Trisha Aquino, Jill Caro, Nina Toralba, Carl Sayat, and Pidoy Blanco. Again, I'm Bella Perez Rubio. Thank you for listening.